presentation where there is no live audience before, so this is going to be an interesting and strange, weird experience for me. So feel free to jump in. There is a ton of information that we're going to be going through tonight. We'll do the best that we can to get through everything and get through your questions and whatnot. But yeah, feel free to jump in, and I'll do the best that I can with not having the play of a live audience. The information that we're going to be going over tonight is through or by a website owner named Mark Hutton, and it is at reactiveattachment-disorder.com, reactiveattachment-disorder.com. And so Mark Hutton has laid these pieces of information out, and I will be going through those. Most of those things I agree with quite a bit. There are a couple of pieces that he has in there that I don't agree with, and I'll tell you about those. And then I'm going to sprinkle it with stories from my own family and then also the work that I do. For those of you that don't know, I am stationed out at Claremont County Children's Protective Services, and I am right inside there the way that you all are in nursing homes or schools or whatever. So the vast majority of my kids are in foster care or have been through foster care. I have some that are on the back end who have been adopted, and then but most are in foster care. I have a few word-of-mouth folks from the community as well. I want to make it clear that I am not an expert in reactive attachment disorder. I would actually submit that I'm not sure there is such a thing, and I don't mean that to demean anybody at all who is working in this field. I mean that more to say that it is in some ways a very confusing and uncertain diagnosis. There's a lot of confusion, disagreement, even within the field of if the disorder even exists, and then to what extent. And I'll cover some of those thoughts here in a little bit. Wanted to kind of start the night off with a quote from my wife. She said last year in April, she made the statement, she said, it is so much easier to parent when your children don't act like total turds. For those of you who don't know, I have 2 biological children, and then I have, I'll call it 3 adopted children. One is not adopted, but might as well for the sake of argument tonight. My adopted child who has been home the longest has been home close to 11 years at this point. The next one down has been home for, I think, 6 years at this point. And then we just added a 9-year-old girl to the family this past April. And they have their own attachment issues, and so you will be hearing some of those things tonight. So that's where my wife's quote comes from and what that relates to. I wanted to start off with this question of, what do you think of when you hear the word or the phrase reactive attachment disorder, or you hear about a kid having reactive attachment disorder? What kind of things pop in your head?
We've got 2 people who wrote in online.
Great. Others can chime in if they...
Yeah, please online, go ahead, type out your responses, and I'll get to those. My personal, this is Abby talking, what I visualize is a very young child with a lot of behavior issues that is very dysregulated. That's my visualization. I picture a kid kicking up a fuss, crying and screaming.
Okay.
Christina Scott says, when I hear reactive attachment disorder, I tend to draw an ominous blank. It's easy to read the definition, but I just don't have any clinical experience to relate to it. So I just think of this rare, intimidating diagnosis that I may encounter.
Okay.
She says she's excited to learn more. And then Brittany says, when I think of reactive attachment disorder, I think of a disorder with children due to issues with attachment while growing up. The child usually has trouble interacting with others and acting out. James Zielinski says, I think of children struggling with relationship losses resulting in behavior problems. And Sean Honnerlaw says, lots of broken attachments. Anybody else who has anything to add, feel free to go ahead and type that out for us.
Okay. I appreciate those thoughts. In some ways, they are a little more tame than maybe I expected, which I guess is it's either a good sign or people are not wanting to reveal their true thoughts about it. I will freely kind of tell you about what my thoughts have been over the years when I heard reactive attachment. I think it was Christina that used the word ominous, and that was a great word. I would almost freeze up. I would think, oh my gosh, I don't want to work with this kid. To be real honest, there was a time when I thought, oh, there's no hope for this kid, and just in many ways dreaded the whole idea of working with a child with reactive attachment disorder. I've learned more things over the years and no longer think those ominous type thoughts. I am now much more able to see them. I don't want to say victim as like, kind of this negative connotation that sometimes we think of when we talk about victims, but maybe more I see more of the humanity behind them, behind the anger, behind the brokenness that somebody spoke of, and the dysregulation that somebody spoke of. I see the humanity behind it, even though when there's this wall of anger that might be presenting up front. I had some thought about going through and kind of explaining what reactive attachment disorder is, and I think I'm actually going to hold back from that. You all have can look that up. I mean, there's the disinhibited form where kids are just very free in their social attachments, or not attachments, but in their sociability. It's very indiscriminate. They will just go from person to person to person. And then there is the inhibited form where they are withdrawn from people. They don't attach to people. They are very mistrustful of anybody, and they remain much more to themselves. The timing of tonight's training is a bit unsettling for me, and I will be honest with you up front. I have been working with 2 children for the past year at work, and probably the 2 most reactively attachment disordered kids that I've ever worked with, and they have the whole history that goes with it. They've had the broken attachments, the multiple caregivers, the trauma in their lives, and those sorts of things. And yesterday, their case has been kind of falling apart with a foster home that was looking to be an adoptive home. That's been falling apart. We have a team of people that are working with the kids, and there's, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 of us on this team, and we don't see eye to eye on the best way to approach them. Particularly one caseworker and I are at very opposite ends, respectfully so, but at very opposite ends. This is different for me because in my work with CPS, we tend to be in lockstep with each other a lot. This has been unusual that we have been so split, and the team as a whole has been kind of unsettled and split. Yesterday, I was told that the agency looked like they were going to be keeping the kids with this particular family for a while. They were going to try and work some things out. That was yesterday. Today I was working with them in their regularly scheduled session, and I get a knock on my door in the middle of the session. I open it up, the caseworker standing there. She said, "Can I talk with you a second?" I said, "Sure." I step out. She then begins to wind me back through the maze of CPS, which was unusual because most times if I get interrupted, they just talk to me right there. And she proceeds to say that the agency has decided to move the kids, and they're going to be moving them this coming Friday, and they will be like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours away. And I had approximately 14 minutes or so to work with these kids until they were gone, and then that was it. I've been working with them for a year. So we pull the kids into like a visitation room, and we begin, the caseworker begins talking to them. I'm just sort of there. I don't really know what I'm going to do at this point. Caseworker begins talking to them, and in about a 7-minute period of time, it went from one brother punches the other brother, then kicks the other brother, then is completely dysregulated, screaming, yelling, I'm not going anywhere. Meanwhile, the caseworker hasn't said it yet. He just knows that, okay, dun dun dun, she's making a deal out of it, so we must be moving again. And So then she's just talking about some of the good things. Oh, they've got pets there, and they've got a field, and they've got this. Meanwhile, the other brother who's been hit and punched and whatever, he's just picking up toys in the playroom, and he's just kind of playing with the toys, and could have been talking about the weather for all he cared. And she's talking about some of the different things going on. And so the one brother punches and kicks, screams and yells, and then begins asking about, oh, well, tell me about some of the things there, and then begins talking about the move, and when do we get to see them? Oh, I wish I got to see them today, and why do we have to wait until Friday? And by the time that they left, about 7 minutes later, they were like walking out and real happy about the whole thing. And in 7 minutes time, I'm like, that is like a fast-forwarded hyperlapse photography thing of what reactive attachment disorder is. So it kind of shook me up a bit, and that's what I was kind of going through today. So yeah, that's kind of this example of what this is like. They now will lose me, they will lose their family, they will lose their friends, they will lose their school, all of those things that they've already lost a bunch of. I mentioned a little bit ago that reactive attachment disorder, even within the field, is not necessarily, like, everybody agrees there's depression, right? Everybody agrees that there's anxiety, right? Not everybody in the field agrees that there's reactive attachment disorder. I fall into the camp of that reactive attachment disorder exists, but that DSM does a awful job of helping you to diagnose it and helping to tease it apart. I fall much more in the camp that attachment falls on a continuum or on a spectrum, and that you can be securely attached on one end, and then on the far end you're insecurely attached. But there can be a whole bunch of problems in the middle of that. A lady named Mary Ainsworth, she has kind of spread this out, this whole continuum idea out a little bit more. She talks about secure attachment. She talks about an anxious attachment. I will tell you that my son, who has been home for about 11 years, he is anxiously attached. We got him when he was 22 months old. He's been in our home for 11 years. He still does not trust us. He still does not fully claim us as his own, and yet at the same time, he is attached. If he's hurt or injured, he comes to us. If he has a need, he comes to us. If we go out into public, he's not going to go off with a stranger or anything along those lines. So he's attached, but about a week ago, he looked at my wife and said, "I don't trust you," and he meant it. So there's an anxious attachment. An ambivalent attachment is, you know, they kind of got one foot in the whole idea and they got one foot out. Maybe I want to be attaching to you, and maybe I don't want to be attaching to you. That is where our 9-year-old, who just came into our family in April, that's where she's at right now. At sometimes, when she walked up into our yard, the first day that she was coming to her home, she throws open her arms, gets this big smile on her face, and says, "Daddy!" No, I mean, yes, technically, but that's not how she should be reacting. On one end, that's that. On the other end, it's, "I hate you, I don't want to be Roush, I don't want to be here, I just want to go back to blah, blah, blah." And it goes anywhere in between. There are times when she is comfortable with us, and there are times she wants nothing to do with us. There's an example of kind of that ambivalent attachment. My other daughter, who has been home for about 6 years, she was pretty insecurely attached for about 4 of those years. In the last 2 of those years, she has done a 180, and she is now like rock solid. I would say that she is securely attached in our family, and that's a beautiful thing. All right. Any thoughts or reactions at this point? Nope. Okay. Excellent. All right. So what doesn't work with working with kids with reactive attachment disorder? There are several things that are just not that great when working with them or in parenting them. The first one is attempting to persuade the rad youngster about, you know, through logical or reasonable or practical ways, why you're right and they're wrong and why it should be this certain way. Rad kids are highly unlikely to be influenced by that sort of linear reasonableness, and it can create in them a sense of almost looking at you and questioning you, because life isn't A to B to C to D according to their experience. So that doesn't necessarily work out so well. Next thing that doesn't work out so well, yes?
Sean was wondering, what was
Sean's got experience at this.
He's a troublemaker. What was the name that you gave? He said it sounded like Ainsley regarding the spectrum of attachment.
Ainsworth.
Will you spell that for us, please?
Mary, M-A-R-Y. That's it for you, Sean. Ainsworth, A-I-N-S-W-O-R-T-H. I don't think Sean should be allowed to ask questions. He has too much real-life experience. He's going to ask me questions that I can't answer. The next thing that doesn't work is emotional reactivity.
He says, thank you and thank you.
Yes, Sean, I respect you very much. Emotional reactivity, just really losing your cool. And let's face it, all parents lose their cool. But with securely attached kids, losing your cool can make them shake in their shoes and want to kind of shape themselves up and come around. Losing your cool to a rad kid actually, and on one hand, increases their sense that life is not safe, and on the other hand, increases their own sort of grandiose sense of power, like, ha ha ha, you adult, look, I just made you act like a fool. So that doesn't work so well. Negotiating with a rad youngster. Well, honey, if you do this, then I'll do this. Doesn't work. They will play you. They will own you. Number 4, rescuing a youngster from the consequences. As parents, sometimes we want to protect our kids from the consequences or the natural occurrences that may come through their own behaviors. That's not a good idea. You know, or the other thing is attempting to solve problems for them. That's also not going to be good. They're going to work against you, and they're going to play against you in those ways. All right, so kind of there's an overall philosophy in working with the rad kids. All right, you might think it's love. Oh, if I just love this kid, I will help him to do whatever, whatever, whatever. And there are people who would cringe at that and react to that, and I've had healthy disagreements with people about whether that's true or not. I would say that that's true, but love comes in different forms. So often people say love is the hugs, the kisses, the you know, what's going to be all right, the you know, arm on the shoulder. That's their version of love. Well, sometimes love is being very clear, very clear-cut, almost at an emotional distance, because that's what that kid needs at that time. So love may look different, but it's not kind of the sort of stereotypical way of love.
Velma is wondering, can you repeat what was the #1 thing not to do?
Don't attempt to persuade by logic or reason what your point of view is. So the #1 issue, or the #1 foundational philosophy, is not love so much, but safety. These kids need a sense of safety. It is their pursuit or their desire for safety that leads them to be as strategic and controlling as they are. And if you think of control in the sense of what they're trying to get, if you think of it as a symptom, that can be easier as a parent to say, all right, I know what they're trying to do. They're trying to build up their sense of safety, and instead of worrying so much about the control and not getting into a power and control battle with them. These kids have a general feeling of being unsafe in the world, and their controlling is an attempt to help bring a sense of safety to themselves. A lot of times, they are the only people that they can trust, and so they're going to do what they think is best, even if in the grand scheme of things, it's an awful, terrible idea. Some of the parental qualities that are most helpful in working with kids with RAD: having a sense of humor, being curious about how things will develop versus being just focused on the end result. So in other words, being able to sit back and just kind of like, huh, I wonder how this is going to work out for you, my child with RAD. Let's see. Being able to meet the youngster where he or she is versus where the adults want them to be. That's a really, really hard one for a lot of parents. A lot of parents want the kids to jump right to where they want them to be, and they don't do such a good job at meeting them right where they're at. Being emotionally available and responsive to the kids without letting them walk all over that. So you're there for them, you're able to listen to them, you can hear them out, but you're not letting them use that in a sort of a game of control that they're going to use your own emotions against you kind of thing. I feel like I'm just talking 100 miles an hour and okay. I think you're good. Okay.
Does anybody online think Greg needs to slow down? I think he's doing great.
Okay. All right. Okay. A word of warning. Don't care more about the problem or the issue than they care. And we've talked about this, or not we've talked about it, but you know that kind of, even in your own therapeutic work, that if you as the therapist are working harder than the child or the adult or whatever over a period of time, that's an indication that there's something not right. And so one of the things we want to communicate to our parents is don't worry about it. Don't worry about it more than they worry or more than they care. Honestly, nothing is going to change when you're the one carrying around the anxiety about the issue compared to them. They need actually to carry around a certain sense of that anxiety, because it can be turned into energy for them about what needs to be done. Moms and dads cannot make their youngsters better. They can't make the youngster do the work that they need to grow. The youngster's going to have to make those decisions on their own. They can't make them be successful. In a paradoxical sense, acknowledging that your youngster has the freedom and the power to make a mess of their lives in some ways actually helps them to not do that, because you're not just in there controlling everything for them. You're letting them make mistakes, and then you're helping them to see how those mistakes connect to some of the decisions that they've made. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some teaching that can be done for the kids, or some learning that can be done for them. Let's look at the idea for behavior overall. RAD kids tend to see that they're tend to see sort of the payoff of their behavior as the only thing that's relevant. I'm going to do this thing, and it's going to have this effect right now, and that's what they pay attention to. They don't necessarily pay attention to, I do this thing right now, here's the payoff, and then it's going to cause me problems, or it's going to create an issue down the road. A lot of times they are only paying attention to right there and then. One of the things that you want to try and do is to set up experiences, or to use the natural experiences that they may have to help them to see that the costs can come back on them, and that the decisions that they make with their behavior can create a problem for them down the road. Let's take the example of lying, for example. If a kid is telling a lie and we bail them out of the lie right away, they're not going to learn from it. If a child is lying, helping them to see that this behavior can affect not only right now, but it can affect how people perceive you on down the road, can be a great life experience, or a real life experience for them. Really, with something like that, you're just going to have to sit back and wait for it to develop. There's going to be a time where they're going to lie about something, and it's going to come back and haunt them, not only now, but later on. I had a situation with a client here. It's been developing over the past probably 2 months or so. He had a vape pen. He wasn't allowed to have one. There was some suspicion that he had one, and he began lying about it. And then the family found some parts of one, and he lied about it more, and then somebody else found another couple of parts for it, and he lied about it more, and he just spun these lies. Fast forward about a month, so that started about 2 months ago. Fast forward about a month, and he had a job at a food place. He ended up losing his job because the job believes that he was stealing. He maintains he had absolutely nothing at all to do with the stealing. Well, last week, he and his foster mom and I were talking, and we were talking about how he finally came clean with the vape pen. He's still denying anything related to the thefts at his place of business or at the restaurant. And we worked to connect why it was difficult to believe him on this very large issue of theft from his place of business, to the tune of $400+. Why it was hard to believe him on that issue when the vape pen was so clearly where he spent so much time lying about it. And the thing that he had to come face to face with is that foster mom is dedicated, and she is like a rabid dog. And when the restaurant situation first came up, she was in his corner 100%. She was talking to the manager of the restaurant. She was having them get security feeds and all of these things, and she was not going to let them rake her foster son over the coals. They still don't have, the restaurant still has not been able to show the proof that they say that they have, but the foster mom looked at him last week and said, you know what, I just don't have any energy left for this fight. We spent 2 months on this vape pen thing, and I don't know whether you're telling me the truth or not. I just don't have any energy left. And he looked at her and he said, are you telling me that you're not going to fight for me anymore with the restaurant? And she said, I don't think so. I just don't have it in me anymore. And that was like a smack to the face of him, but it was the situation where he needed to recognize, yes, he lied about a vape pen, and it was probably some $30 deal or whatever, but it spun off into something so much bigger. And when he really needed this lady, and by the way, I don't know how I can call somebody a rabid dog and it be a compliment, but it is. He had, let's call her a bulldog, maybe that's better. He had this bulldog in his corner, and he wore her out, and she just let go. She released her grip. Choices. Because of the disconnected thinking, rad kids tend to struggle to see how their choices have any sort of effect on their own worldview, or the connection between their choice from what happens now to happens down the road. You'll hear me talk today a lot. You'll hear me use the word connections a lot, and that is because a lot of times the rad kids, their thinking is so disjointed that they struggle to make a connection from one point to the next to the next. So helping them to see how their own choices, good choices or bad choices, connect to things that happen on down the road can be very important. They need help understanding even just kind of their feelings and how triggers and feelings are connected, how feelings and behavior are connected, how behavior and outcomes or results, how those things are connected. Helping the rad kids to see from beginning to end how their behavior or how their decisions are affecting them can be important in helping them develop sort of that worldview or a consistently linear worldview. Yep.
We have a question from Jackie Rose.
Okay.
She said, you have talked about children who are living with people not their parents. Do you see RAD in children who have been taken from parents because of the drug abuse or drug abuse of their parents that took the kids away from the parents, back to the parents, away from the infancy through school age?
I don't totally understand your question, Jackie. Saying that can kids go back to their birth family and show signs of reactive attachment disorder even with their birth family?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. Okay, moving on. No, I'm just kidding. Yes, definitely. So an attachment disorder is a disruption in attachments. So that can happen anywhere along the line. I have known kids who have been, I got ready to say born at birth. Is that not the dumbest thing you've ever heard? I was born at a very young age. Kids who were born and removed from their family right from the hospital, like they never went home with their birth family. They're placed immediately into a foster family, get adopted, and have some form of reactive attachment somewhere on that spectrum, even though they didn't really technically live with that person, at least not post-birth. So yeah, so you can have attachment disorder on the very young end, and it can go all the way up through teenage years or whatever. And just because a child goes back with their birth family does not mean that sort of those attachments of disorder go away. And in fact, it may actually make it worse in some circumstances because it was the birth family that didn't hang on to the kid the way that they were supposed to. So then the kid can get placed back there and be really angry with that person, like, you did this to me, this is your fault, kind of thing.
And just to sort of take that a step further, Greg, so could a kid who's living with one or even both of their birth parents still develop reactive attachment disorder if there are a lot of other broken relationships and inconsistencies in their life? I'm thinking of like military kids maybe who move around every 6 months or something like that. Or does that, like, is that inherent in the criteria for RAD that you're not living with your birth family for one reason or another?
Yeah, I wouldn't say like a military family or something like that it would be on the attachment disorder spectrum. There certainly might be some social struggles with that. There might be some relationship struggles later on in life because they didn't necessarily have some linear relationships. If they are born into a family that takes care of them and feeds them and clothes them and is emotionally connected with them and things, then I don't think that that's going to be an issue. If they are born into, let's say they're born into a family that's drug addicted, but it never rises to the level of a CPS, but mom and dad are kind of drugged out, and the kid is putting TV dinners in the microwave for themselves when they're 5 years old, and they get home from school and mom and dad aren't helping with their homework and that sort of stuff because they're passed out in the bedroom or whatever. But they're still they still have enough food in their belly and they're not being beaten, so they don't that's not coming up to the school teachers. I would say yeah, in that sense, that there could be definitely could be an attachment disorder in that sense. Rad kids need help learning their emotions. They tend to know two, no big surprise, they tend to know mad and happy, and they tend to feel mad more than they feel happy. They don't necessarily understand the other feelings. The other thing that's kind of interesting is they a lot of times aren't very aware of their physical sensations as well, so they don't necessarily get the sense of hot and cold or pain or hunger or tiredness. I have seen some kids with attachment disorder. There's kind of the striking difference. They don't necessarily have a good sense of their physical sensation, and so pain on one hand. I have seen attachment disordered kids take a wallop. I mean, they're walking along and they're talking to somebody and they don't see the corner of the door coming, bam, and they just smack full tilt into the door and they kind of shake off, and that's that. I've seen kids that just they've harmed themselves or whatever, and they shake it off, and things that would make us shudder and whatnot, no problem for them at all. And yet on the other end, you take that same kid that just cranked themselves into the wall, can be walking by, and somebody will walk by and they'll brush past their shoulder a little bit, like, oh man, oh, did you see what that guy did to me? I can't believe he's trying to, and they're losing it, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even think it would have knocked a fly off if the fly was there, kind of thing. And so there's that sort of extreme from one to the other. going back to that emotion piece, helping them to know that there's more than just mad and happy. Really, a big one is disappointed. Help them to learn and understand the feeling of being disappointed, because they get disappointed a lot, but it immediately ramps right up into anger for them. And if you can help them to say, wait a minute, no, I'm disappointed about this, and it's different than being mad about it. Man, if you could just get them mad, happy, and disappointed, that's going to go a long way. But of course, you want to help them to learn some other words as well. You know, might be maybe embarrassed or worried or something along those lines can help also. They also may not read their own physical sensations very well for what they're feeling. So all of us here at this training tonight, we might have something coming up, and there's we get these butterflies in our stomach, and we're feeling kind of tense, and we kind of feel our heart beating a little bit faster, and we would know without really thinking about it, oh man, I'm feeling pretty anxious about this. These kids wouldn't necessarily read that. If they had butterflies in their stomach, they might read it as being hungry, or they might not pay attention to it at all, or for them that might be the precursor to being mad, like they feel that feeling in the pit of their stomach, but all they know is mad and happy, and this doesn't feel good, so therefore it's not happy, therefore I must be mad, and not recognize that, oh, I'm feeling anxious about this thing. And throwing anger out there keeps people at a distance, so it can help to keep them safe, going back to that concept of safety, because they've kept somebody at a distance. Eye contact is huge. On the side, I'm an adoption assessor, and so I go to folks' homes and I spend probably 6 hours, well, a minimum of 6 hours with them, just interviewing them and going through safety audits of their homes and those kinds of things. On the back end, when I'm doing post-placement reports with them, one of the things that I'm asking about is eye contact. Tell me about the eye contact with your child. Eye contact is, we all know this, right? It's this window into our soul. It's connecting with the parent emotionally, and kids with attachment disorders don't necessarily want to do or use eye contact real well. And you know some things. You can kind of gently move their hands to them. You can kind of lightly tap their cheek. There is an author. Hey, this is a little bonus factor idea. There's an author named Gregory Keck, Dr. Greg Keck. He ran an attachment center in Northern Ohio. Unfortunately, he died last year. I think last year or 2 years ago. But he came up with this whole list of things, of ways to help people get eye contact. Things like look at each other in a mirror. So if you're standing behind a kid and you're looking at each other in the mirror, you're getting eye contact that way. Or things like playing games with them, like maybe put shaving cream on each other's face or something like that as kind of a joke, or face paint. So you're looking and you're right there putting face paint on or whatever it may be. Helping them to gain eye contact is so important because it helps to connect with that emotionality. Be careful though. This is not something to be done at all costs kind of thing. If the child is really resistant, you don't want to force it too much because it will contaminate that situation, and then it makes that a situation where they feel more defensive and more angry. You're just looking for ways in which you can increase the level of eye contact with them. Same thing for physical touch. Physical touch is huge in this area. When I came through grad school, one of the things that we were taught, among many things, was we're not to touch our clients at all. And I've had to rework my thinking. If I have an attachment disordered kid, I'm looking for ways to touch him or her. It does make me nervous in some sense because kids with attachment disorders, they're not attached, right? And they might want to say something. So I'm careful about how I do that. But I have this really neat example of this one girl I was doing this with. She just did not want anybody touching her at all. She's 14. She needs to understand what good touch is and needs to have some experience with that. So with her foster mom's permission, this girl's been in this foster home for a long time, with her foster mom's permission, I let her know I was going to begin touching this girl just in rather benign ways. But the way that it started, my very first touch of her is she was out in the waiting room, and I walked by, and she's sitting down, and she's sitting on the chair here, and I just kind of walked by, and I stuck my toe out, and I touched her toe with my toe, and she, boom, it was like I had burned her. She pulled her toe back, and that was it. That was all I did. Next week she came. Well, I mean, we did our session after that. Next week she came, went out, touched her toe again. That progressed. It went from touching her toe to, like, I would start giving her whole foot kind of like a kick, not a hard kick, but like a playful, you know, we're joking around kick. Well, then she started giving that stuff back to me, and at that point I'm like, oh, this is golden. We are on something here. She started doing that stuff back. Then there would be times where I would reach out, and maybe it was at the end of session, and she was going, or she was saying goodbye or whatever, and I'd reach out and I'd touch her arm and say, hey, I'll see you next week. Just a little tap on the arm. The furthest that I have taken that with her is she was sitting in the waiting room, and we have developed a pretty good relationship with each other, and she was joking with me and I was joking with her, and she said something that was kind of like intended to be a playful put down of me, which in working with kids, when kids are giving playful put downs, that's fantastic. I love that stuff because that means that they're trying to connect with me. Well, she gave me this playful put down, and I went over and I just kind of like boom, and I slid in next to her, and I just smashed right up against her, my leg and my side, and just sat there. And she just kind of looked at me, and then she looked back and looked down, and she looked at me again, and then she kind of scooted away, but it wasn't like that reaction, like that first toe touch. It was just sort of like, did you really just do that? And she kind of moved away. And then I looked up at her foster mom, I made eye contact, and we did the whole eye thing, like, hey, wasn't that great? And she's like, yeah, that was great. And I'm like, yeah, this is fantastic. And it was just all with her eyes kind of thing. Go ahead.
Do you, or have you done high fives with her, Greg?
Yes, high fives, definitely.
Do you do hand hugs? Do you know what that is? Because I want to show you. Hold on, just hold on, stay right there. Sit back down so the people can see. Hold out your hand like you're going to give a high five. Okay. And you do this. Okay. Hand hug. Like your hands are hugging like they're little people.
No, I have not done that.
And I have a client who is in the nursing home, but touch is very important to her. She doesn't get a lot of touch. She didn't have it growing up, yeah. And she certainly doesn't get it now. And I'm not a hugger by nature anyway, so that's what we do. If we've had a great session, we high five. If it was a sad session, we hand hug.
Yes.
And so that might be something to incorporate with her.
Yes. Some of you may cringe and yell and report me to the board. It is my goal before she and I end, it is my goal that she and I will give each other a full hug. As part of that transferring over to what she's trying to do in these relationships. That's going to take time. That might be another year yet. But the other thing is teaching them how to hug. This is so interesting. A lot of times they don't know how to hug. My own son is like this. You have to teach it. You know, you go to tell him to hug, and I would hug my son, and he'd be all like, no, son, put your arms around me. Now you got to squeeze, son. No, squeeze real hard. And literally months worth of teaching my son what a hug is and how to hug. We've now gotten to the point where, because we're guys, we're trying to squeeze the life out of each other when we do it, but that's perfect. That's great. All right, thinking connectedly, I've talked about that before. It's the idea of just helping them to think from one thing to the next, A to B to C. I'm not going to go into that. I want to kind of save some time on there. Time. Help them to understand time. Because their thinking can be so disorganized, they are often jumping around through time. They don't see how things go from one thing to the next. A lot of times they will move forward something that happened in their lives. They will move it forward as though it happened more recently than it actually did. This can get so drastic, but is very common. Just because it's drastic doesn't mean it's not common. It can be so drastic that they will attribute to their foster parents or to whoever is providing care for them now, they will attribute something to them that actually belonged to a birth family or to some other prior caregiver. And so to help them to see, like, wait a minute, how old are you now? Oh, you're 12. When did that happen? Oh, you think that happened when you were about 8 years old? Okay, well, how long have you been with your foster mom? Oh, you've only been there for the last year and a half. Do you see that it could not have been her that did that because you didn't live with her there at that time? And it may seem like obvious to us, but to these kids, it's sort of like, oh, wait a minute, because they just kind of think, oh, this happened now. So helping them to understand that sense of time can be really, really important. Help them to understand the difference between then and now, so that they can grasp, well, that was a then issue, this is a now issue kind of thing. All right, some guidelines in working with these kids. Access to things, all right? So basically you want to not let them use anything in a way that it's not designed. If it's not an appropriate use of that toy or that clothing item or whatever it is, you're going to limit their access to it. So the example that the author gives is a parent is trying to talk to the child, and the child's fiddling with the toys, doing whatever, and they're not listening. The idea then is, oh, toys are for playing with, not for ignoring your parents with. It seems that you're confused about what those are for. Here, I'm going to take those right now until you can learn ways that you use those things appropriately. Let's talk about this issue, and then you're going to work with them to help them to regain those toys. In part, they have to be able to show behaviorally that they're ready for the toys or whatever it is that you have removed. They have to be ready to show it. But they also have to speak it through and say specifically what they are. They've got to be able to tell you what they're going to do with those toys and how they're going to use them in the future. Don't just have them repeat you. So in other words, now these are toys, right? Right. And you're not supposed to use them to ignore me, right? Right. Okay, if I give them back, you're going to listen to me the next time, right? Right. Don't do that. They're just, you could say, and this is a pink envelope or a pink elephant here, right? Right. And they're just going to agree with you. In other words, have them restate back, like, what are these for and what are you going to do with them? These are toys and I'm supposed to play with them. I'm not supposed to ignore you with them. Good.
Tina is wondering, Greg, she says she has a client with RAD whose grandmother thinks she's a quote-unquote problem and isn't quote-unquote buying, that she has a mental health problem. How do you handle this type of situation? The client is frustrated because she doesn't feel understood by her grandmother.
So her client has RAD. The grandmother does not agree that the child has RAD?
She just doesn't think it's a mental health problem. I think she thinks the child's just being a problem child.
Okay. I probably... My first attempt would probably to try and help them to understand why it's an issue. I might provide them with some literature or point them to some websites to help grandma see that. I don't know that I would spend a ton of time there because grandma, for whatever reason, may be invested in, I don't want my grandchild to have a mental health diagnosis. She's not crazy, she's just stubborn. Maybe kind of the thought with it. So I would make an initial attempt to help her see why it is a real issue and try to provide some information to her. Beyond that, rather than getting into just a whole yes it is, no it's not, yes it is, no it's not type situation, I would then begin to try and meet the grandma where she's at, like, okay, well, you're having your grandchild come to me. What is it that you're seeing at home? What is it that you want to change? Let's see if we can work together. Let's not worry about what it's called. Let's look at some helpful things that can be put into place to try and help you at home and see if we can build this up in a better way. Okay. All right. Advice, another guideline for advice. Don't offer advice to a rad youngster without first asking them if they want your advice. Apparently my wife has reactive attachment disorder because she doesn't want my advice without asking for it either. If you offer them a bunch of advice, if they've not asked for it, they're probably going to reject it. You're probably going to feel hurt or irritated or frustrated, and then maybe become more invested in telling them the advice and why they need to follow your advice, at which point they are going to reject it all the further, and you can see how that becomes this negative loop. In other words, if you ask them for advice and they say, no, I don't want it, don't give it to them. Let it go. Yes, they may fail at whatever it is that they're doing that you want to try and prevent them from failing, but if they do not want your advice, don't give it for them. Or don't give it to them. You're looking for to create a problem, power struggle if you do that. A lot of times these youngsters will at some point give you advice, and it's okay to look back at them and say, oh, thank you, but I didn't ask you for your opinion. I will be sure to seek it out next time if I really want that. And that can help to avoid just getting that whole sort of battle of over disrespect there. The concept of appreciation versus praise. You will get further by expressing appreciation for something than you will praise for something. Appreciation helps to put you and the child kind of on a level playing field, like they have done something and they have helped you out, or you've done something you've helped them out. But it's kind of this level playing field, and it's less threatening to them if you are saying something to them like, hey, I appreciate that you helped your sister out right then, or I appreciate that when I asked you to come, that you did come. That was really helpful. Thank you very much. Praise, on the other hand, can create this dynamic of level. The parent has the authority, the parent has the upper hand, and the parent is praising the child for what the child has done, as though the child has now like come underneath and listened to the parent, and it can make the child feel like, oh, wait a minute, this was a battle, and I just did what they wanted, and now they won, and that can create this tug of war, and it may actually then add behavior or add opposition further down the road. So appreciation helps to avoid kind of a rubbing their face in it kind of thing, and can make it more likely that they will respond in the future. When talking about consequences, use empathy with them, but it's not necessarily going to be how we think of empathy. Basically, you're offering them empathy for the trouble that you know that they're in. They've done something wrong, and you are saying something to them like, listen, I know this is probably humiliating or it's embarrassing, and I know that you're probably going to want to misbehave with it. I know that that's there. And you might then even go on to thank them in advance for not doing that. I know you're going to want to misbehave. I can just tell that this is humiliating to you, but thank you for making a good decision ahead of time. I appreciate that you're going to work hard and try to do the right thing. And let them know that there is that expectation there that, yep, here's this consequence. They're going to have to do it, and they're going to have to do the right thing, but you're doing it kind of in an empathetic way. Be careful that you let go of any anger that remains after you've given the consequence. Remember at the very beginning when I talked about the emotionality, delivering consequences when you're angry and barely in control of yourself, that's going to create just some really bad dynamics there. And so be careful just to let go of any anger. not only why you're given the consequence, but then after it's over with as well. Consequences as it relates to time. This is an interesting one, and this may ruffle some feathers as well. Consequences, a lot of what we do with rad kids is paradoxical or counterintuitive. With our regular kids, with our securely attached kids, we might say, you are in your room for 10 minutes, young man, and then you're going to come out and you're going to tell me what you think, or what what you're going to do differently. And we're going to give we're going to limit the amount of the consequence. We're going to put a time on it. With rad kids, you don't necessarily want to do that. You want to kind of keep them on their toes. And really what you're looking for is a change in behavior, not some fake apology. So in all seriousness, if you, let's say you're going to give a kid a timeout or whatever, it might be 30 seconds long. And forget the whole, 1 minute for every year of his life. I personally think that whole thing is hogwash. But it might be 30 seconds. It might be 30 minutes. I got into a healthy debate again with one of these caseworkers at work last week. What's the lady's name? Karen Purvis wrote a book called The Connected Child. And in this book, she talks about this concept of you make the time fit the consequence. I'm sorry, you make the time as long as it needs to be for the behavior change. And if it's short, it's short, and if it's long, it's long. And a foster parent was directed to this book by a psychiatrist. The foster parent began putting it into place. The kid sat there for like an hour and a half because he was not going to do whatever it was that he was supposed to do. The caseworker found out about it, and she flipped the lid. She came to me, and she was expecting me to defend like her own position and poo-poo the foster parent, and was very surprised when I said, so what happened? She said, well, she said he got done and finished it and took care of it, but it was like an hour and a half, Greg. Do you not understand? He's only 8 years old. I said, yeah. So it took him an hour and a half until he was ready to do it. I said, what would you have wanted her to do? Set him down for 8 minutes, and then he's still mad, and he's spitting nails, and he's not doing what he needs to do? What are you going to do at the end of those 8 minutes? I said, on the other hand, if she sends him and he's there for 30 seconds and he pulls himself together and comes back, that's okay. That's okay too. We had to do this with my own son. He has been in like a self-imposed, and that's the other thing. It's self-imposed, right? I'm not making him stay there 2 hours. Was probably the longest that he had to do. I didn't make him stay there for 2 hours. He made himself stay there 2 hours. That was on the long end. On the short end, he got to a point, there were times where I would say, hey, buddy, you got to go collect yourself. You need to head to your room, collect yourself, come back, and we'll deal with it. Fine, boom, boom, and stomp, stomp, stomp up the stairs. He would get to his room. He would take a deep breath. He would turn around. He would walk appropriately back down the stairs. He would come around the corner and say, okay, Dad, I'm sorry. Can we please? And we would go right on. I mean, it was like seriously maybe 15 seconds long. But his behavior changed. And 15 seconds accomplished and what something did in 2 hours before. And that's okay. I know that may ruffle some feathers. Feel free to talk with me about that later or whatever if you would like to. Discipline. The concept of discipline, speak succinctly. There are parents who can like speak volumes, and I don't mean volumes and loud, I mean volumes as in like volume 1, volume 2, volume 3, when it comes time for discipline. Man, they can go on and on and on and on. That is not good for these kids. They will have tuned you out by about the third word, and it also then begins to overwhelm them. It then, whatever shred of like self-control that they had left is probably going to be lost in just this onslaught of words and lectures from the parents. It's speak succinctly, speak clearly. When you've said, here's what I want to have happen, and I thank you for what it's going to be done, you're done. You stop it, and you're not getting engaged in this whole well, here's why and whatever. Explanations, just the persistent explaining, undercuts a parent's authority. It puts, in other words, it puts like the reason for doing the issue, or puts the authority based on the explanation as opposed to based on what the parent has said. Man, this is a hard one for parents, because honestly, some parents want to blow up. They want to like deliver back to their kids some measure of, you know, they're going to extract a pound of flesh from that kid, kind of thing. By the way, I've been there. I have absolutely been there. I have overloaded my kids. There have been times where I'm just like unloading because I'm making myself feel better, and I'm completely ignoring all of this advice. And I might even have a little part of my brain going, Greg, you wouldn't tell people at work to act like this now, would you? So I know how that can happen, but it doesn't affect anything at all. It just becomes this emotionally charged environment. And when there's an emotionally charged environment, when the parent is coming unglued, that then creates a very strong sense of lack of safety for the child. And going all the way back to the beginning, safety is the #1 issue. And if by your own behavior, if you are creating a sense of unsafety, you're kind of failing at your #1 role with that moment of parenting. Anything? Nothing?
Not yet.
Oh man.
You're answering your question before they have
Yes.
it.
Either that or I'm saying so much that I can't keep up with what's going on. All right. Emotional contagion. A lot of you may actually know this more kind of in the concept, or be familiar with the concept of mirror neurons. But emotional contagion is the idea that emotions can be passed from one person to another, kind of like colds. So there's this whole nonverbal stuff that's going on. They might hear it in the tone of voice and the facial expressions and things, and what the child is seeing broadcast by the parent, they then begin doing and feeling themselves. So parents have to be very careful to monitor their own facial expressions when delivering consequences, when talking to the child, when trying to connect with them, because they don't want to act as an unhelpful contagion. So the idea of mirror neurons, that when I see something going on in another person, I have neurons that start firing that can make me feel or react as though that issue is happening to me. And so if I'm a kid and I see my parent coming unglued, then I may have those mirror neurons, that contagion starts to happen with me, and I start to come unglued, even though it's the parent that's the one that's doing it. I'm starting to feel that way. So it's important to just deliver those thoughts, deliver those consequences, deliver whatever it is that you need to deliver as calmly and as appropriately as possible. And when the kids are firing at you and they're shooting flaming darts at you and they're yelling at you and all of those things, again, to try and be as calm as you can, to try and keep your face blank, because what that can do is help their own mirror neurons say, wait a minute, that person is calm, cool, and collected. Maybe I don't need to be so out of control. Maybe I can begin to calm down, and it helps to just create that whole umbrella of safety that we're looking for with these kids.
People say your pace is good, and they are busy taking notes. That's why they're not asking questions. Just wanted to give you some reassurance there.
Yes. Abby knows that I tend to over-prepare for these things, so I don't want to sound like I'm just doing all this.
And he's going to give himself bad evaluation form scores, too.
The idea of giving and receiving and how guilt plays into that. Be careful about how much you're giving a rad youngster, like in birthdays and Christmases and whatever celebrations. Avoid giving them much more than they can give back. What this does is we might think that, if I get an attachment disordered kid placed in my home and they've been bounced around to 5 different places and their dad overdosed and all of these things, I might have the sense of like, oh, my heart goes out to this kid. I want to give them everything that they never had. And their birthday comes, and I'm getting them a bicycle, and I'm buying some new clothes, and I got the coolest new video game that they wanted. I'm doing all of these things, and I'm thinking, oh, man, I'm just a great foster dad. Look how I'm helping this kid. And in the moment, what you might get is, oh, wow, this is great. Oh, yeah, this is wonderful. Now, they're just going from thing to thing to thing, and as kids will do. But what can happen on the back end is this whole, like, dread, the sense of guilt, like, oh, no, I can't reciprocate with all of that. And they have given me so much more than I can give. And in a healthy attachment sort of way, we might be thinking, oh, wow, that was too much, you shouldn't have. And then on the inside, we're like, but man, I'm glad you did. For these kids, on the outside, they're saying, hey, this is great. On the inside, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I don't deserve all of this. And it becomes this guilt. I don't deserve it. I'm no good. They've given me too much. It's, you know, if you take somebody who has literally been starving, you don't sit them down to a Golden Corral buffet. You sit them down with, I don't know what you sit them down with, right? But you sit them down with some crackers and some milk and some very tame, like easy to digest foods, and you start to build them up, because if you do the whole Golden Corral buffet thing, you're just going to make them sick as sick can be. I saw this happen. I was actually with, I have personal friends who are foster parents. They ironically got one of my kids on my caseload. That was a whole weird mind bender, because we get together with this family and do things, and so I would see this kid at work, but then we're getting together and there she is at home. It's just weird. I hope it never ever happens again. But they and their love and their desire to provide for her, they gave her a birthday party. She didn't have a birthday party before. They invited kids from school, and they did all of these things. And the next day, the girl just trashed the stuff. I mean, she was cutting stuff up. She was markering on things. She's throwing things away. She's tearing things up. She simply could not handle all of that generosity. The concept of information. It is fine to withhold information from rad kids, even if they've directly asked for it, if you have a sense as a parent that that information is going to be somehow misused. If you feel like they're going to misuse it, you do not have to share that information with them, particularly if it relates to something that's happened in the past. There's this idea of connectedness again, the idea that, oh, I don't believe that I can share that with you right now because last time there was this issue and we talked about this, and you remember how you ruined that, and so like right now I'm not going to tell you that. I will give you the information as you need it, okay? And you kind of throw that as you need it in there to help them with that sense of safety. It is not a how do I say, it's not a holding something over their head kind of thing. You know, in an unhealthy relationship, you'll hear people like, oh, do you remember 4.5 years ago, and it was like on a Tuesday, and you said this to me, and what a brat you were. It's not that kind of a concept. With these kids, it's building the sense of safety of, I don't want that situation to repeat. I don't want to give you more than you can handle. When it's time, I will give you what you need to know, and we will go from there and take care of it from there. Love. This is kind of an oddly relieving concept. Offering and expressing and giving love is the parent's responsibility. Receiving it, letting it in, taking it in, accepting it, that's the kid's responsibility. And if we can help our parents to understand that, yes, you have to offer love, you have to give it, you have to express it, and you're done. That's your role. It is up to the kids to decide whether or not they are going to accept your love. This kind of absolves you as the adult of the responsibility of trying to find a way to get their love in. You know, I just love this kid. He's not taking it, so I gotta keep working at it. Keep working at it to the extent that you keep showing love, but you don't have to take that one example and just make sure that you drive that home. It's up to the kids to respond to it, and it's up to the kids to remove the obstacles that they have put up. My wife has a great phrase that she uses with my kids. Her phrase is, "How have I wronged you?" Because my wife is, we are a traditionally homeschooling family. My wife is just an amazing $1 million woman. She's at home with these kids all day long, and she's teaching them. And a lot of times the kids are becoming emotionally unglued, and they're yelling at my wife and things like that, and she just calmly responds with, "How have I wronged you?" And that sentence helps the kids to kind of back down, like, okay, Mom hasn't done anything to me. Mom is actually here teaching me and trying to help me. It's not her fault that I'm having troubles with my math, or it's not her fault that you know, so-and-so came into my room when I didn't want them to. So it just kind of takes away that parent's responsibility of trying to get it in. Rules. This is a good point in any part of life. Be sure that when you're working with these kids that rules are stated in a positive a positive fashion about what they are supposed to do, not in a negative fashion about what they are not supposed to do. The author makes some statements about that our unconscious mind doesn't process the negatives. In other words, if we say, you know, "Don't talk to me that way," their brain is not really processing through very well of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. You want to phrase it in a positive way to say, "Please speak respectfully to me." So now you're telling them what you are expecting, as opposed to, "Don't talk to me that way, young man." That negative phrasing causes the kids to struggle. They don't understand it. And then ironically can lead to increasing the negative behavior, because what you said, "Don't talk to me that way, young man," and they're processing kind of this, "Talk to me that way, young man, talk that way, young man," and you actually can increase the amount that undesirable behavior will occur. So if you're phrasing it positively, please speak to me respectfully, you're focusing on what it is that you want them to do, and helping them to make the right decision. So yeah. Safety, we talked about it kind of in the general context of things, but safety is the #1 priority, and it takes precedence over doing anything to promote attachment, encourage better behavior. If the child is doing something unsafe, you've got to do something with it right then and there and protect their safety. These personal friends that I have, their daughter and my daughter go to college together, and it was my responsibility a couple of weeks ago to pick them both up from church youth group where they were leading some junior high kids, and I was going to take them back down to the University of Cincinnati. And the one girl needed to go to her parents first, and so she went to her parents, and I went home, and then I was going to go get them, and I got a call from my daughter saying, "Can you please take us back tonight? There's been an issue, and they can't take us back." So I went to the house there, and as I came around the corner, there were 3 or 4 sheriff's vehicles out in front of their house, and as I was approaching their house, there was an ambulance that was driving away, and I didn't know anything about it. Well, I come to find out later that they had a foster child in their home who became very, very dangerous to themselves, to the foster family, to himself, to the property and things, and they ended up having to restrain this kid, not like lay on him kind of restraint, but just the dad kind of got him and held his arms to him and held us back there until the police got there. Technically, that was against the rules. Technically, they're not allowed to do that. Technically, they've got to keep him safe. And so there was an investigation done by their foster care agency because there was this restraint. It would have been done for anybody. And the agency, they did their investigation and did not cite the family because they recognized that the safety was the #1 issue. And in that moment, even though it is against the rules for a foster parent to hold a child like that, they recognized that had they not done that, that either that child would have really gotten hurt or the family would have really gotten hurt or something along those lines. And so they weren't cited, which was a relief for all of us, for sure.
Greg?
Yes.
Jackie Rose had an observation about what you were saying a minute ago about the framing things positively, you know, don't talk to me that way. Jackie pointed out that don't talk to me that way also gives the kid power.
That's it? She's
Yeah.
telling us more?
No, I mean, I thought that was a good observation. So, you know, when you tell the kid, don't talk to me that way, you're acknowledging that that kid has power over you. They're doing something to you. And so that's just another reason that goes hand in hand with what you were saying about framing it positively.
Yeah, absolutely. Our newest daughter, who's come into the home, has figured out that our son doesn't have a real good handle on his emotions. And she has found that though he is almost 13 and she is just barely 9, that all she needs to do is stare at him. And we're not even in the room, and she doesn't say a word, and my son loses it. And for a while we were dealing with her, and then honestly the other day I looked at him like, buddy, you are going to have to develop a thicker skin. You are totally turning your power over to her. You have let her know all she needs to do is glance in your direction, and she's got you. I said, buddy, you're gonna have to get over that, because we can't make her not look at you. We can punish it when it happens, but she can do it at any time, anywhere. I mean, you figure riding in the car. I mean, that's something she can do from 50 feet away. Oh my goodness. Come on, son. Come on, you can do this, boy. Unpredictability is really important when working with kids in the right way, okay? And so here's what I mean. Being unpredictable in the discipline that you use can be golden. If they figure out that every time they do this, then you do that, you've become predictable, and they are going to craft these elaborate plans to make it happen or to get around what you have crafted. The other thing that will happen is they will begin to get the scales out in their mind, and they'll start to say, you know that if I do this thing, then here's going to be the punishment, and you know what? Right now it's worth it. I'm willing to do it. And I am a rule follower to the hilt. My father-in-law makes fun of me because if I'm walking up to the Kroger and the one sliding door that opens all the time says in and the one sliding door that opens all the time says out, I go the long way to the in because I don't go in the out because it says out. I'm a rule follower. So the idea of like planning and saying, I'm willing to take it, I don't personally get, but I know it happens with these kids. So being unpredictable in the consequences that you use and saying, well, we'll figure out what's going to be going on can be helpful. Now, here's where I say you have to be careful about what you're unpredictable about. Routines. I am a huge advocate for clear, consistent routines. Get up at the same time every day, eat food at the same time every day, have a bowel movement at the same time every day. Whatever it is, as much as you can build in routines for these kids, that's going to be super important because that fits into the idea of safety. And if they know that 2 o'clock is pooping time, then obviously I'm exaggerating, but if they know that, okay, I get up at 8 a.m., okay, I go to bed at 9 p.m., okay, snack is at 3 p.m., and if snack is at 3 p.m., by golly, snack's at 3 p.m. I coach the parents that I work with. Keep like a Costco or Sam's Club or type size goldfish or cheese crackers or trail mix, or not necessarily with the chocolate in it, but just some shelf-stable food in the car, because if you find that if snack time is at 3 p.m. and you are out and about, your kids, their warning bells are going to start going off. Oh no, it's 3:05, I haven't eaten yet, am I ever going to eat again? Oh my gosh, you can't keep me safe because I'm not eating right now. You might think I'm exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. It is this particularly, by the way, I've got 2 kids from an orphanage. I had to kind of think through this one because she's still new to us and I'm still learning her history. Particularly if kids from an orphanage where they didn't know if their next meal was coming, you know, those kinds of things. So if lunch is at 3, a snack is at 3, have snacks in the car so if you're out and about. But being predictable in the consequence. If the girl stares at my son, I might handle it one way this time, but then the next time I might handle it a completely different way, just to kind of keep her off balance and not being real sure so that she can scale in her own mind if it's worth it. All right. Some specific interventions that can be used. You can ask them, what are you paying attention to? If they're struggling to pay attention to, help them to ask them the question, what are you paying attention to that is leading to this behavior? What is it? What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What is the behavior? What are you paying attention to in your mind that is leading to this thing? And that can help them to zero in on what's going on internally that you're seeing externally. The idea of belief versus truth, and that what we believe does not always equal what is true, is important to help them understand, help them to see the difference between those two things, that a lot of times people will believe things that aren't true. My wife and daughter both say that I'm out of my mind, that when I'm watching my Bearcats play basketball and they're going for a free throw and I'm waving my arms, they both say, Greg, you're not affecting that free throw. And I'm like, oh yes, I am. Clearly they don't understand the difference between belief and truth, but we need to help our kids understand the difference between belief and truth. This is kind of interesting because what ends up happening sometimes with these kids is they end up fooling themselves for so long that they start to lose touch with what is true, and they believe it just because they think it's true just because they believe it. And so causing them to kind of take a step back and to look at the differences between beliefs and truth can be helpful to them to just kind of understand what is going on with them inside. The concept of cross-talking is one of my favorite things to use, and particularly for kids who sabotage themselves can be super important. So cross-talking is the idea, it can be done in 2 ways. One way of cross-talking is if my kid is here and I'm trying to talk to them and I'm trying to get to them to understand what's going on with them and what they're thinking and feeling, and they're not buying it and they don't want to talk to me at all, well, I might cross-talk with myself, and I might play both parts. I might play the part of my kid and me, and I might say, so what I think is going on right now is that you're just really upset because your sister was staring at you. I'm not upset that she was staring with me. She's not supposed to stare at me. Well, it seems like you're really upset. I'm not upset. Well, and you do this, you play this back and forth. Well, what happens a lot of times then is the kid, they can't stand not being part of that dialogue, and a lot of times they will jump in, and maybe they're going to jump in and correct you, or maybe they're going to jump in and say, yeah, that's exactly right. And all of a sudden now you've brought them in and re-engage them in the dialogue. So that's one form of crosstalk. The other form of crosstalk is the idea of you and another person when a child is within earshot. And the child might be in the next room, and you can be on the phone with somebody, but just the idea that they overhear you talking about them, particularly if they've done something well. A lot of these kids will sabotage, so if you went up to them and said, oh my gosh, what a great job you did in school. I know you've been having troubles, and we've been having troubles with your behavior, and I got this report from your teacher today, and she said you did great, and you were on green all day long, and I just think that's fantastic, and great job. And they hear that, and it's too much, and the next day they go to school, and they're spitting in a kid's drink, and they're knocking some kid over on the playground, and they're yelling at the teacher, and they're like, what happened? Well, you've given them too much, and so they had to sabotage that because it doesn't fit with their view of themselves. So you crosstalk by talking to somebody else, and maybe they're in another room or whatever, and you just say, you know what, little Johnny did really well today. I was so pleased with how he handled himself, and it went really great, and I'm hoping to see more of that tomorrow. Now, if they're overhearing it, that sometimes is enough of a distance that they're getting the message, but they're not doing that whole, like, right with you, locked in with you kind of thing, so it doesn't overwhelm them as much. Demandingness, this is one of those pieces where I don't necessarily agree with the author. Because rad kids can be so demanding, a lot of times when they make a demand, the author is saying that you can turn around and say to them, I don't know, what's in it for me? And the author says, you know, this is a way to help the kid remember that relationships are reciprocal. I don't necessarily agree with meeting their demandingness with a what's in it for me, because my fear with that is that you will reinforce the idea that we only do things in relationship with others if there is something in it for me. So I put it in here because I'm using his material, but I don't particularly agree with that one. Distrust of self. This kind of goes back to the whole idea of belief and truth. A lot of times these kids will do all sorts of things. They will have like these false emotions, or this fake laughter, or they'll play dumb, or they'll forget things, or they'll make up these answers that aren't real. And what ends up happening then is they learn to distrust themselves, and they don't even necessarily recognize over time that they're doing it. One of the things that you can do is help them to see that they have become skilled at fooling themselves, so they don't know what's real or not. If they're saying something to you like, I don't know, to all of your questions, you can reframe it as, well, you're pretending not to know, but you really do know, and let's see if we can get to the bottom of this. No, I don't know. Well, no, you're still pretending. You can even point out that, you know, I'm not even sure you believe yourself sometimes when you take these large extreme stances here. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to create almost a split within the youngster that he begins to question his own, like, snap judgments, and to say, well, wait a minute, is that really what it is, or maybe it's not that, and you're trying to help him to just kind of slow down enough to think through, is this what's really going on with me? Is this what's really happening? You can, if you're challenging their thinking, you can even sort of state up front, you're probably not going to believe me about this, but here's what I see. And when you do that, you're creating kind of this paradox for the kid, because they want to, their natural stance is to fight against you. And so it slows them up when you say, well, you're probably not going to believe me, but now if they don't believe you, you've just predicted it, and now they're actually agreeing with you and your prediction, and they don't want to do that. But if they don't act that way, or if they believe you, well, now you've kind of won with that too, because now they're actually buying into what you have said. And so it just slows them down and helps to kind of monkey with their own strategic maneuvering as they're trying to get up on top of you over that. The idea of forgetfulness, it should be reframed as an intentional choice. You might talk to them about how their brain has taught them to forget things, or taught them that they don't need to remember things, but that you are going to work with them to help them remember, and you're going to hold them accountable for the things that they need to remember. What you're wanting to do is to help them to sharpen their memory and to learn things so that they will remember and follow through on what it is that they've been told to do. But the idea is that you're holding them accountable. And if they're talking about forgetting things, you're putting it back on them, saying, well, this was something that we talked about, and I'm sorry that you don't remember it, but you still have to pay the price for it, or the consequences still in force for that. loosely tied to that then is the concept of promises. This is kind of a no-brainer. Don't accept promises from a kid who has a history of breaking promises. Honestly, if a kid has a history of breaking promises and you keep accepting the promises, that's on you, and it's foolish, and you're going to have to deal with that on your own self. But help them to see that promises are put in place for a reason, and that if they say this promise here, they need to follow through down the road there, and it helps with that idea of connectedness, that that A to B to C. I've made a promise here, I'm going to follow through on it, and here's sort of the consequence on the back end with that. Next piece is unintelligible speech. Rad kids are really kind of famous for this. They will mumble, or they will sort of invert words in sentences. They're just going to kind of mutter, or they're going to speak softly, and it's honestly an issue of excuse me, it's honestly an issue of like control over the parent, because then it forces the parent to like, what? Huh? What did you say? Can you say that again? And it is used as like this strategy. Now, if they have an actual learning disability or speech disability or language disability or something along those lines, yes, take that into account. But if those things don't exist, then you have to recognize that it is a purposeful strategy that they're using to try and gain control over the parents, and it puts mom and dad in a position of they don't know and they have to try and find out, and now they're playing a game of chase with that kid. So if you ask them what was said, they're probably just going to say, well, you should have listened the first time, or they're going to blame it on you. They're probably not going to say it back again. They're going to say, well, you had your chance and you blew it, kind of thing. If they're going to be unintelligible or whatever, the best thing to do is sort of pretend as if they didn't speak. And later on, if they say, well, I told you about that, you say, well, clearly your message didn't get through. You didn't do a good enough job of communicating. It is your responsibility to make sure that I understand. And if you don't think that I understand something, make sure you check with me, son, to make sure that I got it. And you're taking it and you're putting the responsibility back on them to make sure that their communications with you have gotten through. And then if you can help them, then if that ties into later on where they want something from you and they allege that they communicated, that's one of those things like we talked about at the beginning, like, oh, well, here's sort of the natural consequence of that. Because you didn't communicate, you don't get to go to the dance on Friday night, or you don't get to go out, or whatever it is, kind of thing. The idea of unresponsiveness, if they're being unresponsive to you, you might, again, go back to that role-playing piece and talk about what you think the youngster might be saying. If they're, if you have questions for them and they're just kind of looking at you like this and they're not saying anything, you can go back into the role-playing about what they would be saying, and then talk about what you're saying and what you're thinking, and go back and forth with that. And a lot of times then they're going to jump in and stop being so unresponsive at that point. Last kind of thing to help them learn about is the victimhood and responsibility. A lot of times these kids will try to play the victim. We are empathetic people, we teach that, but with these kids during the time, if they're sort of in that victim stance or victimhood place, empathy is the worst thing that you can do at that point. That's just enabling that behavior, and it will create more of that and draw more of that out in them. So it's the last thing that you really want to do at that point. You really want to help them to feel accountable for what's going on. If they've done something wrong, you're going to need to have them repay what's happened. One of my favorite things to do is if they've done something wrong to another person, that it's not they're grounded from screen time or they have to go to bed early or something like that. If they've wronged another person, my favorite thing to do is that they now have to serve that other person in some way. So maybe it's, okay, well, you did this to your sister, you're going to have to do their chores, or you've done this to me as a parent. You're going to have to help me make dinner tonight, or whatever it is, and so that you're creating that sense of accountability to them. Any thoughts? Any questions at this point? Put everybody to sleep. All right. Questions to avoid asking your rad youngster. Did you? Whatever. The most likely answer is going to be no. Do you remember? Nope. Answer is going to be no. Why did you? The answer is probably going to be some version of something that's made up, or an I don't know kind of thing. Or what did you say? And they're just going to go back into the whole unintelligible speech pattern again. Things that you want to ask is, how does it happen that? Or how is it that? Or what happened here? And trying to just zero in on very specific things that you're trying to get direct answers for can be helpful. If a question that you ask goes unanswered, let them know you're going to make up the answer for them, and the answer may or may not be something that they would like or would have answered, and they will learn real quick if you're serious about it that they don't want you to answer, and so they might give you an angry answer, but they're going to give you an answer a lot of times to the question if you once or twice kind of follow through on the, oh, no answer? All right, so I'm choosing for you kind of thing. Oh, by the way, if you ask them a question, let's say, I don't know, do you want to wear your jeans today, or do you want to wear your leggings? And they don't answer. There's no answer. You pick the answer. Okay, I guess jeans it is. I don't want to wear jeans. Give me my leggings. I want to wear my leggings. Do not, under any circumstances, let them wear their leggings at that point. It is not helpful to you, and it's not helpful to them to say, okay, fine, here you go, your leggings. You just should have said that the first time. In that whole thing, you've just taken all of your parental authority and you've given it over to them. If you get to the point where you make the decision for them, there is no going back. Oh, jeans, and no, I said I wanted leggings. Give me the leggings. Oh, sorry, you should have spoken up. Jeans, I don't want the jeans, so give me the leggings. I'm so sorry that you made that decision. Perhaps next time you'll make a different decision. And you hear that, you kind of put that back on them, like, oh, well, that was the decision you made when you didn't speak. You forced me to make the decision for you. Okay, some additional strategies, things that you can do. If a child is having a tantrum or meltdown, just understand that different kids are going to need, have different needs. So some might need direct confrontation, some might need kind of like a warm hug, others might need distance, and you're going to have to learn that with each kid, how they're going to handle it so that it doesn't, so that your reaction doesn't actually end up creating more of a problem and prolong the tantrum itself. I talked about this a little bit ago, the idea of something will happen. It fits in the whole area of being unpredictable in discipline. So if the child has done something wrong, you don't necessarily have to come up with a consequence right then and there. You can say something like, I don't think that was a good move. If you do that, something will happen. Well, what do you think is going to happen? I don't know. I'm pretty sure something will happen. And you're just kind of unpredictable. That does a couple of things. One, it gives you time to, it buys yourself some time to come up with something creative. A lot of times our kids will do something and it's hard to come up with something right away. And also buys time that maybe you can talk to dad or whoever might be involved that's going to be home later or whatever to kind of talk to them so that you're getting on the same page. And then it creates sort of this internal angst for the kid because they want it solved and done and over with right away, that creating that sense of anxiety and unpredictability later on can help them, like, oh, I don't like that feeling, so I'm going to do the right thing because I don't want this nefarious something will happen hanging over my head. Rejecting the family. A lot of times these kids will reject the family. This is going to be one of those counterintuitive type of solutions. If the child wants to reject the family every now and again, it's okay to kind of allow the consequences of that to happen. My son one time rejected my wife quite a bit. It was just intensely for a while, and so I gave him what he wanted. He didn't get mom for a period of 1 week. She was not to cook for him. She was not to do his laundry. She was not to get him to any of his practices or any of those things. Obviously, if she would have been home and something to his safety would have happened, she would have dealt with it, and she supplied him with a week's worth of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and things for dinner or whatnot. But the rest of us ate. We ate like kings that week, right? So I grounded him from his mother. And I gave him a taste of what that was like. A couple weeks ago, my one son, the addition of this third adopted child has really caused some significant regression, and particularly in my one son. And he has been saying recently that he wanted to get rid of her, and she shouldn't be here anymore, and she needs to go away. And so I kind of spun the natural consequences of that back on him, like, okay, buddy, but you understand that she has, like, we divide up the family chores among all of the kids. So if you don't want her here, that also means you don't want her doing the chores, and nobody else wants to do them, and since you didn't want her here, that means that you actually have to pick those chores up. And of course, he didn't like that real well, and I haven't heard it since. I haven't heard him say, we need to get rid of her. Since then, but you know, I kind of spun that back on him in terms of the natural consequence of, all right, you want to reject it, here's what the effect of your choice is going to be related to that. If there has been some sort of a problematic situation, review what happened, explain what is expected the next time, get a firm commitment from the child that it's not going to be that way, and then the key thing is to go back and have them repeat all of that. Don't just have them agree, yes, I won't, okay, got it, but you're going to have them go back through, okay, the next time I go over to Grandma's house, I'm going to look her in the eye when I say hello, and I'm going to give her a hug, and I'm going to thank her for dinner, and then when we leave, I'm going to give her a hug again, and I'm going to say that it was nice to see her, and then I'm going to come home. And you're going to have them repeat all of what it is that they're supposed to be doing, not just simply agreeing with you. There's this idea of point plans. I'm not going to spend much time on here. We're familiar with point plans or token economies or something. The author asserts that a 24-hour time period is the best period for a point plan, which helps to kind of regulate that sense of time. For a lot of the kids that I work with at work, a 24-hour period is too long of a time. They need things broken down. I just wrote one with a family last week where I think it was broken down into about 6 time periods in the day. It was from breakfast to school was one, and then while he was at school was another, and then from home time until dinner was another time slot, and then dinner to bed, I guess it was 4. And he was trying to earn electronics time with that, and he could earn so much time. There was really 6 because it was broken out into 60 minutes. I don't remember what the other 2 were off the top of my head, but he needed it broken down more than in a 24-hour time period. He wasn't going to be able to last that 24. So the idea of what I was trying to get him to do is, okay, buddy, you blew it first thing in the morning when you got up, but there's still time. You can still earn some time later on. Oh, just because you had a bad time at snack time doesn't mean that the whole day is shot. So I don't necessarily agree with the 24-hour time period. One of the things that I do like about something like that, though, is they effectively ground themselves when they do something wrong. You'll give them the full breadth of privileges. It's wide open to you, buddy. You just got to do this and this and this. It's being part of the family kind of things, and you get all the privileges. But if you don't do that, okay, you're making that decision. I'm sorry you've made that decision. Perhaps you'll make a better decision the next time. Turn around and put it right back on them. Planned regressions. This is identifying a specific time of the day. A lot of times I will do it as a specific time of the week where the kid is given permission to regress and do whatever they need to do. Hey, but I know that you are just building up in pressure and stuff, and you feel like you're going to blow, and you just really need to kind of have a meltdown. What do you think? Do you think 10 minutes will do that? Do you need half an hour? How much time do you need? And you're giving them time to say, okay, here's when you do it, and let them do what they need to do. It also can be in the concept of a regression in terms of their age. So maybe you're taking an older kid and rocking them or snuggling with them, and the kid their age normally wouldn't be doing that, but they might need that. It might be, I'm doing this with my 9-year-old. She's 9 in terms of her chronological age, but in terms of her like emotional development in some ways, she's more like maybe 5 in some areas. And so I'm going through those books, you know, like the Dr. Seuss books and those things that you would read with 5-year-old kids. Even though at 9 she might be too old for some of them, I'm going back through and reading some of them to her, just to kind of help regress her in sort of a way and help to then begin to build back up and help her move forward again. The paradoxical interventions, they're nonlinear and illogical, and therefore it helps to undercut some of the oppositionalism from the kids. Like one example is a humorous but not a mocking or sarcastic agreement with like their view of the family. You might say something like, "Yeah, buddy, I know you probably did get stuck with about the worst family in the world, and I'm sorry about that, but we're what you got." You can do that. The other is kind of the idea of giving them permission for some misbehavior. Like, hey, you know what? When I tell you this, I'm certain you're going to want to whine, and you're going to want to complain. You might even want to jump up and down, and that's okay if you need to do that. And you're giving permission for them to do something. So either they're going to do it, and you've given them permission. So then you take the pressure off yourself, because like, okay, well, I told them I could do it, so you don't feel so stressed out. Or they're not going to do it because they're going to show you, and I'm going to be a golden child, and there, what are you going to think about that? I'm doing everything right. Okay, buddy, I'm scared. You know, please don't do everything right. Don't throw them in that little briar patch. Over practice. If they've done something wrong, don't just have them go back and do it the right way. Have them go back and do it 3 or 4 times in a row. My son has miles put on our stairs because when he gets mad, it's boom, 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 and he wants to go stomp up the stairs. Oh, buddy, that's not the way we walk up and down the stairs. Come on back down and try that again. Fine, oh, come down. Boom, boom, he stomps all the way down. Oh, buddy, that's not how we come down the stairs either. And so we have spent a fair amount of time of, nope, go up, and sooner or later he's going to get wore out from it. And okay, then he goes and he walks up the stairs the right way. What he has done a number of times is finally, after all of the miles of stairs, he walks up the stairs just fine, and he gets to the top of the door, and he slams his door. Oh, buddy, that's not how you're supposed to use the door. Let's work on how you open and close the door, and it just takes a lot of persistence with that. If kids have come from an orphanage, they may be fully invested in hoarding and stealing and lying and all sorts of things, setting other people up, physical aggression, poor hygiene, whatever. And you can describe it as orphanage behavior. You even literally use that term like, oh, you know what? That's orphanage behavior, but you don't have to do that now. That was back then. You're here and now, okay? So we're not going to pay attention to the then and the there. We're going to pay attention to the here and the now piece. And it helps, again, like we talked about with that time piece earlier, helps with the connection, that linear, do the A to B to C kind of thing. And those behaviors, those belong then. You don't have to do that now. And let's practice what you need to do now kind of thing. Forced choice is a no-brainer. I think we've all done this. Do you want to wear the red shirt or the green shirt? Either option is okay, but in a forced choice, you are creating a situation where you're giving them a choice, but all choices are acceptable to you as the parent. There's one on here, accessing anger. I've not ever used this. I think I would feel silly using it. But the idea is if it's a child, not one who already has trouble, like he's overly angry, but somebody who maybe is more passive-aggressive or really internalizes the anger as opposed to externalizes the anger. You can give each of you a phrase that might be very difficult, and you sit across from each other, and you're anywhere from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. You're just going to say it to each other. You're going to agree on what you're going to say, and you're going to agree on the volume, but you're not going to be listening to each other. You know, I don't want to be part of this family. I don't want to be part of this family. I don't want to be part of this family. And you're having them repeat it over and over again, and it's helping them to access it. And over time, then you can actually build up the volume that they're saying it to help them to get in touch with the anger and what's going on. Like I said, I've not used that one before. I think in a way I might feel silly if I did use it, but the author kind of talks about how that can be real helpful. Why questions? Why questions are almost always maneuvers by the kids to like gain control over you or to take authority from you. They're usually false questions. In other words, they usually already know the answer to the question, and they're just trying to get you to say something, and they want to hope to trip you up if possible. If you get a bunch of these why questions, the best answer is to either point out that they already know the answer or to ask them to answer their own question. A lot of times I will repeat the question right back to them. What are we doing this weekend? Son, what are we doing this weekend? We're going to Grandma's house. That's right. So those are some things that you can do, is point out that they already know, or you can ask the question right back to them. Or you can give sort of like a tongue-in-cheek but not a sarcastic answer. You can say, well, you know, the reason that we eat together as a family is because it helps our body digest the food when we eat together as a family. And you're just kind of doing these sort of goofy things with the kid to help them get through those why questions so that you're not driving yourself crazy with them. All right, thoughts, questions. I have just unloaded. I apologize. I did this training once in a 3-hour time slot, and I tried to do it at the same because I didn't think anybody wanted to be here till 9 o'clock tonight.
I have a big picture question, Greg, and we'll see if people online feel free to type out your responses, and I'll read those to Greg, your questions or your comments. So from like a diagnostic standpoint, so let's say you do everything right as a foster parent or as a clinician helping a kid. How do we know the reactive attachment disorder resolves, or does it never resolve? And if it doesn't, what does it look like when that person's an adult?
That's great. You know, last night when I was getting ready for bed, I had my opening of how I wanted today to go, and then this whole thing with these kids being moved happened today, and it totally threw off my initial opening. I'm glad that you went back to that. One of the things that I used to think of is, oh my gosh, rad, ominous, terrible, I don't want to be part of this. And I also thought, once rad, always rad. I have found that thinking of the attachment disorder on a continuum is very helpful to me as a clinician. It's also helpful to me as a parent of some attachment disordered kids. By thinking of it on a continuum, continuums, we know that progress can be made. When I first started working with kids, I would say that a diagnosis of RAD was kind of like a death sentence. Back then, people didn't think any change could happen, that it could get better. Change absolutely can happen. Attachments can grow. It is a very long process. Lots of patience has to be had by the family. They're going to make lots of mistakes. They're going to, every one of these things that I have described tonight, if I have put them into play well personally in my life, I have also put them into play badly in my life, and there has to be a lot of just even forgiveness within the parents for each other and within ourselves. But progress can absolutely happen. One of the things that I train my parents at work on is you're not going to be measuring progress by leaps and bounds. And if you are looking for big changes in behavior, you're not going to see that. It's kind of like with our ISPs, that we could measure something on a 1 to 10 scale, And maybe we don't see change on the 1 to 10 scale, but if we moved it to a 1 to 25 scale, we might see a little bit of change. But if we moved it on a 1 to a 100 scale, now we can actually see greater change because it goes from, let's say, a 90 to an 80, which is like, wow, okay, we're getting somewhere. But if it was on a 1 to 10 scale, it may not go from a 9 to an 8 kind of thing. So just trying to help parents to understand they have to take joy in the small things. And if they can do that, then it's going to help them go on. But they've got to really kind of adjust their idea of what is rewarding.
So if we have kids who don't learn to get regulated and who don't find that stability, are these individuals going to grow up to be diagnosed then with borderline antisocial personality disorders, those kinds of things? Because I hear a lot of that. You know, some of those stories you were telling, if that person had been 22 instead of 12, oh yeah, we would have just said, you know, oh, they're borderline. And people's reactions to borderline are very similar to people's reaction to kid with RAD, like, well, that's it, you know, death sentence. So they're just I wonder, like, is that the prognosis then if somebody doesn't get adequate interventions when they're a kid?
Yeah, I would definitely say, you know, just what is true for just about anything. If the earlier you catch something, the better the outcomes. The more resources that you can apply to it, the better the outcomes. The longer it goes without change and whatnot, the more ingrained that it becomes. Certainly these kids can grow up to be those things. Our jails have lots and lots of kids, or lots and lots of adults who would have fallen on a reactive attachment disorder diagnosis before. If they're not in jail, maybe they're the borderline people. Maybe they develop into some other personality disorder type people. But it is not a necessary end. It certainly can be different. These two boys today, I kind of don't want to know what their future's like because I have this gut feeling that they're not going to do a whole lot of recovery, and for a variety of reasons. Part of what made today hard is I've worked with them for the last year, and I honestly don't know if I've made a lick of difference. That's just tough as a clinician. But some other kids that I have seen where at the beginning on paper you go, oh my gosh, a year, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, it's more of a, oh my gosh, like wow, look at where they've come and look what has happened. Parents who have a need to have everything go their way and they've got to be in total control all of the time really struggle with these kids. The parents who don't have a certain amount of flexibility and a certain amount of ability to manage and deal with chaos in their lives don't do well. And I have seen some adoption disruptions where I'm confident that if that kid had been placed in a different adoptive home, it would have been hard, but it would have worked and it would have been okay. Well, they were placed in this home, and you know, a mom or dad or both had to have everything exactly just, you know, there's consistency and then there's like obsessive consistency, and that doesn't work well. That highly inflexible, that's not good with these kids because they're constant. Things with them then are so disorganized.
It is just a little shy of 8 o'clock. Does anybody online have any questions or comments or final thoughts for Greg before we shut her down for the evening? Christina Scott says, this has been so helpful, 4 exclamation points.
Hey, thanks, Christina. And thank you for giving me the ominous word there a minute ago.
Yeah.
Way back when it made me feel a little, it made me feel good.
And not to be outdone, Jackie Rose says, thank you so much. 5 exclamation points.
Jackie, jeez.
There's a lot of exclaiming over here. Sean Harmerwell says, I'm good. Greg, this has been great. Thank you. 3 exclamation points. That's not enough, Sean. You're going to have to do better than that.
I'm just thankful that you didn't ask many more hard questions.
Thank you. Interesting to dive deeper into this topic from what I previously knew, says Brittany LaValle. Thanks, very helpful, says James Zielinski. So yes, everybody's good, Greg. You answered all the questions we didn't know to ask.
And by the way, remember at the beginning, I'm not the expert, so please don't feel the need to come back to me for all the answers on this, because I don't necessarily know.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. You should have your evaluation forms in your counseling source email box, so please fill those out, send them back to me ASAP so I can get you your certificate, pack up, and go home for the night. And the recording will be available tomorrow for anyone who wants to watch it again. Have a great night, everybody.